This is the future of blockchain in retail and consumer packaged goods supply chains. Facilitating our brilliant panel is Dr. Matthew Leotine. He's been helping enterprises innovate themselves with process improvement and technology. His focus also includes exponential technologies like IoT, blockchain, machine learning, analytics, and addictive manufacturing. Welcome, Matthew.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Let's talk about theme number 7. This is in a series, so we're now up to number 7, blockchain caveats. Is this the dark side? What is this?
Up until now, we've been looking at all the merits of blockchain as an immutable means of assuring provenance. And so what we decided to do now is take a look at the dark side of blockchain. Basically, we focused on what are some of the misconceptions and also looked at some of the cautions that need to be recognized when considering a blockchain-based digital ledger type application with focus in the CPG retail space. And then we also considered looking forward in the future, what would be the time frame, given all these caveats and the benefits that we talked about, that we could realistically see some wide-scale blockchain deployments.
I know you guys had a great panel sitting in on this and offering their expertise. Tell us about the panel.
Well, again, many of these people have been with us for quite some time. We had a few newcomers, but they are really great. They all provide their individual expertise, some from the technical side, some from the business side. So we really have a broad scope of panelists representing many, many disciplines. And so we get a very, very balanced view concerning blockchain.
I'm excited to get into this, Matt. There's so much great new information in today's knowledge stream. Tell us some of the stuff we're going to cover here today.
Well, this panel, we basically came up with 4 areas that are of concern, or at least areas that we need to look out for. One is the fact that blockchain does not eradicate all threats. It basically is vulnerable to certain kinds of security threats. And we talked about some of these in our discussions, rogue transactions and endpoint security, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward here. Another area is the degree of collaboration that's required between the partners who are participating in a blockchain. There is going to be interoperability between systems and exchanging information and transactions amongst each other. And so establishing that type of governance and collaboration could be a challenge. Also, one of the things that's been of concern, particularly in the cryptocurrency world, but also here in the retail world, is the fact that blockchain could be limited as volume increases on the blockchain. So given the way it processes blocks in a linear fashion. And then another area that we discussed was the fact that given what's been said and done, what kind of time horizon do we see wide-scale deployment? And we talked about perhaps a 5 or 6 year period.
Great. We'll look forward to getting into these things specifically. Let's go to key point number 1. Let's talk about these dreaded flaws.
Yeah. Well, there are some inherent flaws or things that need to be improved. Basically, when you have a blockchain, if you're fed rogue transactions or incorrect transactions, then they can get perpetuated through the blockchain. And so blockchain could basically have erroneous information. So again, blockchain as itself does not curate transactions. It just processes transactions. So if you have off-chain data that has some integrity issues, on-chain nodes are oblivious to that type of errors.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about governance then.
Yeah, the governance is an issue with respect to implementation. Because blockchain, the vision is to have shared governance across players in the blockchain. Some of these players may not have been traditional trading partners. They may not have partnered with each other or shared information with each other. And so that could be a challenge, getting companies to wanting to share information with other players. And there could be contractual reasons or competitive reasons, even regulatory reasons, restricting that kind of exchange. So that kind of exchange has to be agreed upon up front. So players participating in a blockchain, they're going to need to be vetted up front to determine whether they're willing to exchange their information in some way within the blockchain.
Because of that sharing, it obviously opens up the security vulnerability, which is your key point number 3, right?
That's right. And here, one of the things about blockchain is that the endpoint security is critical. You're only as good as your access. And this is a issue today with the cryptocurrency world. If somebody gets hold of your private key, which is like your PIN or password, they could do a lot of damage. And so that's been a traditional vulnerability in blockchain, even in a private blockchain network. If somebody can hack into a private network, and we see this all the time today, that could create a lot of damage.
So moving into key point number 4, what about the scalability and performance? Is that going to be an issue then?
Yeah, well, that is becoming an issue as you increase the transaction volume on a blockchain. Scalability is not that good. And so this could be an issue if you're going to handle some very, very high transaction volumes. There's been a misconception that some supply chain applications that the blockchain has the ability to follow every transaction that a asset goes through, maybe like a head of lettuce example. Well, that may not be practical in a blockchain. So rather than following all the transactions, it might be better to engineer the blockchain to follow exceptions, basically things that are adverse types of events. It makes it more practical.
Mm-hmm. So key point number 5 then talks more about the threats from the infrastructure.
Yeah, blockchain is only as good as the underlying infrastructure that's so vulnerabilities within the underlying infrastructure could also affect the performance of the blockchain. So things like routing attacks, things like denial of service attacks, Sybil attacks, these kinds of things can impede or even destroy the integrity of a blockchain. They could also create a forking situation, which basically takes a blockchain and separates it into 2 or more separate blockchain networks, and they don't communicate with each other, and that could create all kinds of problems.
I know that we talked earlier about these legacy applications, but talk about key point number 6 here.
Yeah, this point covers the issue of how do you get to a blockchain deployment given where you are today. So if you already have your legacy systems, you might have a data warehouse, you might have an ERP system. How can those systems interoperate? Is there any type of windows or APIs within those systems to interoperate with a blockchain? Or what point do you throw out those systems and migrate to a blockchain type of application? That remains to be seen. And this is one of the key points we talked about early in the panel of how do you establish the business case for motivating or persuading a company to maybe start ditching what they have. So again, this is going to be a challenge with wide-scale adoption.
Right. So your final key point number 7, talks about general deployment caveats.
Yeah, this kind of summarizes everything that we've talked about in terms of, okay, so given what we've said, what do we see the time frame for this kind of delivery? And going across the panel, I think the consensus was around 5 or even at least 5 years.
This was such a great amount of new information and really thought-provoking ideas, so thanks for sharing it. Talk about the top 3 experts on your panel that really stood out for you.
Well, these 3 gentlemen here, they're very, very verbose, but they do provide a fire hose of information. And really, we get some good tips out of these gentlemen. But also, we have to recognize the many other panel members who also provide some good input as well.
Great. Thanks again for sharing this stuff. I look forward to our next conversation, Matt.
Hey, thanks so much.
This is Matthew Leotine. He's a PhD, a professor, he's a consultant, and he really helps companies jumpstart their next generation innovation projects. And we look forward to our next conversation, Matthew.
Thanks a lot. Take care.